Hey folks, Steve here with another Dark Valley video. This video is just going to be sort of I guess a video regarding setup for the Fall Blau Case Blue scenario. So last video we took the time to go through and talk strategy for the overall game, and I put some effort in to begin the setup process, but I wanted to talk through it as I went so you guys could see kind of how it's approached and how to deal with it. Firstly, I apologize for taking so long to get this video up. I've been busy like usual, but I also haven't been feeling well. I was sick a little bit over the past weekend previous, and I just didn't do any sort of gaming or anything related to it because I wasn't feeling well and I didn't want to record and all that stuff. So. Okay, so what I have here, you can see on screen, is basically the force pull for the Soviets at the beginning of Fall Blau, and there's a couple of things that you got to do. And so what I was doing when I set this up was I was dealing with the aftermath of my Barbarossa game or scenario that we had played through on video, and all the units were like scattered up here, and I had just thrown them aside when they were eliminated. And to set up the scenario, what I basically had to just do is spend like 10 minutes, and I just sorted through all the counters and I organized them by type, and then the Fall Blau scenario instructions basically give you the instruction on what to do. So what I had to do was take all the units that are available through turn 12 as reinforcements, inclusive, then remove from the game units that are eliminated and cannot be replaced, and then we place replaceable eliminating units in the eliminated box as indicated below, and then withdraw any other units, blah blah blah. So basically what this required was that I take all the 41 mechanized units, a bunch of 1-4 rifle divisions, all of the 2-4 rifle divisions, and a bunch of other units basically, and set them aside out of play. And I set them basically over here, again organized by type so I can stay organized, but they're all over here out of play. Right? That includes the tank brigade support markers. They're out of the game at this point. And then the rest of the units are situated either in the eliminated box over here or in the Stavka box. So we were supposed to put 6 5-4 rifle armies in the eliminated box, along with 4 tank corps, a guard cavalry corps, and 1 paratrooper corps. 1 paratroop corps. It's interesting. I thought if they're eliminated, they go out of the game. I don't know. Units in the Stavka reserve box, 1 shock army. We've got 4 tank corps and then a guard cavalry corps. And then an increase from before, the Soviets actually have now 7 tactical air support markers. They got 2 via the reinforcements that they had between turns 8 and 12 here. So that's new to the 5 that were there previous. In addition to the other units that I had from the end of our Barbarossa campaign, the Soviets get around turn 10 a whole boatload of tank corps. And this is true tank corps, not the mechanized corps from earlier in the war. This is the beginning of the true Soviet tank organizational structure. And we still have a number of them that will be placed on the map. So what I've got here organized, we've got a bunch of the normal tank armies. We've got 20 of them that are going to be flipped to their reduced side for setup. And we have about 23 that are full strength. So 23 full strength, about 20 that are flipped at reduced strength. We're also going to have we've got 4 paratrooper units to set up. I think most of mine in Barbarossa got eliminated, so this is sort of an improvement for the Soviets. I believe the Marine units we will get to have set up there. You can see 3 assault armies that are not in Stavka reserves available. Then we're going to have a whole boatload of guard rifle corps, guard cavalry corps, We even have a guard tank corps. You can see there the red 438, and then we have a nice chunk of tank corps there, and then our huge number of 1-4 rifle divisions that still exist. And I'm going to make people sick with the motion of the camera, I'm sorry, but a whole boatload of 1-4s, which are, that'll be useful to make sure we have a consistent line, which I think at the end of Barbarossa we really didn't have, but now we've got a chance to hold that up. So the way that this is done, by the way, when we look at setting this up, is that there is a starting line that is running across the map, and it kind of runs like around here. You can see. And what I've done is I've put my, excuse me, the bingo chips on the victory point spaces with a color as to who owns them at the moment at the start of this scenario. So red owned by the Soviets, appropriate. Blue by the Axis, and you can see down here Sevastopol is Soviet controlled, though the Crimean Peninsula is largely under Axis control. So I've put a couple of Soviet control markers here to show which hexes they control. So I'll be setting up these units along the described line here. And what's important to point out as I go to do this is, and I know this was a point of contention for some people, like, there is no order of battle to set up all the units to be exactly where they're supposed to be historically. What Ted has done as part of this setup is basically like give you the approximation of the, I guess, strength of the Soviet army at that point in 1942. But the player has some agency in how they want to set up. If somebody wanted to go and research the order of battle and very hard, and such things exist, right? I've got that Cataclysm book, history book, that I've shown on camera before, that might be able to show some of what that order of battle looks like, but that might be a level of tedium, not really worth it here. But a couple of things, right? So the way this is structured is that the Soviets set up first, and the Axis sets up second. And this means that basically, however the Soviets decide to set up, the Axis has the opportunity to basically counter that setup. And this is very similar, or reminds me of World in Flames, where in World in Flames, the different factions have to set up in a certain order, and this does allow those who set up last or later in the sequence have an advantage because they can set up their units in reaction to the first player to line up the best initial attacks at the start of the scenario or the campaign or whatever. And so what this might mean is, like, if I'm the Soviet player and I'm setting up, if I decide to set up really weird, like I totally give up certain areas, or I make a very weak defense of, say, the steppe regions down here, and put a heavy defense around Moscow, which I believe is sort of the historical situation. Obviously, the Axis can decide to set up heavily against the weak part of the line. And so I can see a situation where things could get awfully goofy in terms of historical detail, right? Because I think if you were to look at, like, what's the historical situation of 1942 for Case Blue, Fall Blau, there are certain things that you really feel like need to be in place for it to feel authentic, probably, but the players have the agency to kind of goof that up a little bit. For instance, as I'm looking at the setup instructions, I don't see a reason why the Germans could not set up every single mechanized unit they have down here. Even if at the beginning of Barbarossa, right, we have army groups north, center, and south, and the Romanian stuff down here, there is a certain setup there, and some of the tank units, mechanized units, are in the different sectors, and if you get naturally to the end of Barbarossa, those units would be in the north, they would be around Moscow, some of them might, they're sort of distributed. The Axis player, if they really wanted to, could just say, I'm going to put every single tank unit and every single HQ, Panzer HQ, down in the south. I don't see anything that says they can't do that. And maybe I'm missing something. So if there's something in the rules that I'm missing there, please let me know. But I do not see any restriction. Now, obviously that's a risk, I guess, that an Axis player could take, right? They could decide, and you could sort of like imagine that, okay, if they did that, that means over the winter or in the early part of the spring time frame before Fall Blau, the Axis has made the executive decision to rail all of their mechanized units to wherever they put them, right? If the Axis player decided to do that. And that might rub some people the wrong way in terms of historical fidelity. I don't know. I think there's pros and cons to it, right? What you're really getting maybe isn't necessarily Fall Blau as we know it, but Fall Blau as really a marker to say summer of 42. However, and I'll point this out, that this might work out easier than I think it will, or might be more straightforward than I'm even thinking of it, because the Soviets do have a setup restriction. So what that ends up looking like is the Soviets have to set up along that start line. There's got to be ZOCs of units along that line. So I'm going to be setting up the armies in various units across that line. No Soviet shock armies or HQs can set up south of Hex Row 24, which is, let's see if I can find it here. So if I'm going to mark it, I'll use the cup here. So basically, if the Soviets want to set up a bunch of stuff south of the cup, right at the edge of the cup is Hex Row 24, they're not going to be able to do that, basically. No Soviet shock armies, so all the Soviet shock armies are going to be in the Moscow-Leningrad front, or sectors, I should say. No HQs south of that line, so Stavka and Zhukov are going to be up there in the north. And then finally, no more than 3 tank corps may set up south of the cup. So we have, if I look at my tank corps allotment, we have 8 regular tank corps and 1 guard tank corps. So 9. So basically, I can't put any more than a third of my tank corps down here in the flat terrain where arguably tanks are going to be most useful, right? Their movement factor, ability to exploit. They're only going to be able to put so many down there. So I think that might be the incentive for the Axis player to put a bunch of tank units down here in the south and look to exploit like they did historically and work their way through here. And maybe, the reason to put some mechanized forces in the north would be to counter the Soviet tanks, but I'm just not sure, what the carrot and stick there is to ensure that the setup is done in a way that feels more authentic. But, again, it's sort of giving that wiggle room to say, well, if the Axis wanted to redirect their armor down south, like I think was part of the invasion plan, after they reached a certain point along the center, this is kind of what would incentivize you to do that, maybe. But okay, that's enough intro, which is a lot of intro, as usual for me. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some time. I'm going to take my allotted unit setup here, and I will put it all up on the map, and then we'll come back and I'll kind of show you what I did to set up the Soviet line, and then we'll discuss how to do the Axis setup, because I still have all of the Axis units sort of thrown to the side disorganizedly, or in a disorganized fashion, because they were still dealing with the aftermath of Barbarossa. You can see the activation chits up there on the track. So we'll look at organizing those guys. I got to take care of all of that as well, and then they'll set up in reaction to the Soviets. So, okay, we'll be right back. Okay, so here we are with the Soviets set up, and gosh, you become really self-conscious about the setup as you go, trying to figure out how to set up these units the best way. The setup requirements are such that you need either units or Zocs in every hex along that start line, and to be honest, for a decent defense, you don't really have a preponderance of force to have a lot of reserves, it seems like to me. Now, I've put a couple of reduced armies in some of the cities behind the line, as you can see here. That's not much of a stopgap. If some of these lines would be broken, we would see some pretty catastrophic encirclements that could happen. But I've tried to set it up as best I can up here to try to make it so that supply can be properly maybe gained again for Leningrad. I'll have to mark some of these guys as out of supply up there. Then all through here, it sucks because I didn't want to put too much in this area in the north for defense, because there's not like there's a lot of places to go for the Axis. I would have rather used a lot of these forces around maybe Moscow or something, but I've got to put them somewhere. And so I've sort of put a lot of the weakened army units, the flipped, reduced strength army units in that sector, covered a little bit by some of the 1-4 divisions, just so there's a little bit more combat strength there. The terrain provides a lot of goodness. Most of the full-strength armies I've put along the southern sector. I've put a lot of the tank and guards around Moscow that I could. Again, in the south of Hex 24, which I marked with this marker over here so that I could do it right. Honestly, there's not a lot of great options on where to put some of those tank corps as the Soviets. And what I did is I set up some here and here. Maybe we'll create a Kursk pocket at some point. I don't know. But all along this flat terrain out here, I mean, I've tried to set up a decent defense for each hex, but I think that we'll see how well that goes. I could see a case where the Axis could really concentrate down here and bust open holes, but honestly, I think you still have the potential to bust open the north and center areas, because if I can hold here, I've got a lot of strength in this area, and you could maybe try to encircle Axis units, or at least push and attain some sort of destruction of Army Group Center, and then be beelining it down the main road through Minsk and so on. It's funny because as I went to set up, it seemed like, it's funny. You look at the map and it's like, I feel like this is a lot of forces, but at the same time, when you go to set it up, you're feeling like there's not a lot there, and you realize some of these hexes aren't terribly strong in terms of the defender combat factors in them, all things considered. So there's, I don't know, you just get that feeling like maybe what I've set up isn't going to be good enough, and of course, Axis version of myself will seek to exploit any mistakes I made, so I may need to set up the Axis another day, just so that I've removed myself from the Soviet setup enough that I'm operating independently of what's there. I still have to set up all of the Axis units and figure out what's out of the game and what's in the game, just because everything's sort of scattered over here on the left off the side of the camera. So there we go. So that's my setup. It's along the line, established. I've got to double check some of the rules around Leningrad supply and what that situation is going to look like. But the next step for setup is going to be getting the Axis units situated and organized, and then we'll place them. So I guess in the next cut, which for me might actually be another day at this point, we'll either, I don't know, I have to decide what I'm going to do with my free time right this second. We'll figure it out, but when you next see the screen change, we will be looking at the available forces for the Axis for the start of Case Blue. Okay, so I decided to do, for you it was still a second, I decided before hanging my hat for the day to go ahead and organize the Axis force pool so that I am ready to roll for setup whenever I next get the chance. So I've set up, similar to what I did with the Soviets, I've sort of just set up all the different units and stacked them up to figure out what do we got. And we really only have, like, this doesn't seem like a lot for what we have to deal with, but we'll have to see. So we're going to have our air units, 3 Panzer HQs, we have an assortment of minor Axis countries that will support, and then we've got a lot of the German units. A bunch of armor here, some mechanized units and motorized units, a lot of our infantry corps here, and a bunch of other smaller infantry units. Starting with turn 9, 10, 11, and 12, we started seeing some of these 1-4 German units, which is kind of interesting that we have them. So, you know, ordinarily we were dealing with German infantry that were, you know, basically 1-2-4s or the 2-4s or 1-6s that you can see on your screen over here, and then we've got these new guys, and they're just weaker. So here's the unfortunate thing. I could try to put this at an angle so you can see the stacks a little bit better. Let me figure out how I want to do that. Ooh, okay. Okay. So now you can see the stacks. They're decently high. There's a decent number of units here. But, and I know I'm going to make you sick. Here's the thing. We've still got to do some other stuff to this before we could set up. So, according to the scenario setup instructions, we need to take, firstly, 3 Romanian step losses of any type. Well, I tried to figure out what was the most economical use of that, and I think, I'm just going to, purely for the sake of combat factors, there was a 2-step cavalry Romanian unit. We're going to send him to the out-of-game pile. And then we're going to do the same for this Romanian tank unit, armor unit, for the 3rd step. It's just a 1 combat strength, and it doesn't really help very much in the big scheme of things. So those are our 3 Romanian step losses. Then we need to lose, we need to flip 8 German panzer divisions to their reduced side. Okay, so what are our options there? That's a 1-step unit. That's a 1-step unit. If we flip a 4, we lose 2 combat factors. If we flip a 5, we lose 2 combat factors. But the 5 leaves us with a 3 reduced, while a 4 armor unit flips to a 2 reduced. So we end up with a stronger unit if they're flipped on the 5, 4, 8 tank unit. So I think what I'm going to do, now I'm going to split it a little bit. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 flipped over here, and 1, 2, 3, 4 flipped over here. That's just reality. Boom. So some of our panzers are reduced out of the gate. And then finally, and they put it first in the setup order, but I'm doing this in reverse order just because it's easier for me to deal with. We have to take 20 infantry step losses, totaling at least 40 attack factors. We may distribute these as we see fit by reducing or eliminating units. So, 40 combat factors via 20 infantry step losses. 20. So it doesn't seem like we have a whole lot here. Well, we're about to lose even more. So let me try to figure out the most economical way to do this. We could do 1 step, 2 step. Yeah, I don't know how we want to do this. What's the best way to do it? The simplest way would be to just knock out some of these guys. You figure 20 step losses. The most economical way to do that for 40 factors, basically each step would take 2 combat factors. And they don't seem to differentiate. Oh, attack factors. Okay. So basically what I'm going to do is we're going to get rid of 20 steps of infantry, probably between these 2 4s and the infantry stacks. That's really the only way we're going to be able to do this in an economical fashion. Because otherwise it just, you're hurting yourself on step losses. It has to be very economical, or you're hurting yourself, because if I just take a step loss off of 1-4, I'm only getting 1 combat factor, and that fulfills one of the step losses, but that means a different step loss is going to have to be that many more combat factors to stay even with the rough ratio that we need to meet for the criteria. So I think probably the easiest thing to do is just to grab a bunch of these guys. 6. So we're going to have 10. Yeah, this will work. I grabbed 1 too many. So 10 of the 2 4s here we're going to put in the eliminated units box. So that's 10 step losses and 20 factors. So we're halfway done. And then, let's see, you take some of these infantry corps and just say these 5 infantry corps are completely eliminated. Well, we can have them half strength. Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll take 5 of these infantry corps and we'll reduce them. So that's 15 steps total with another 10 combat factors. And then we'll do that to another 5 of these infantry. So that we've got basically 10 reduced infantry corps. So that's 10 steps plus the 10 steps, so 20 steps, and that is 40 combat factors. So now, though we've lost some hits here for our Axis forces, this is what we will set up for Case Blue. And to be honest, I'm very worried about our ability to progress here. This does not seem like a huge amount of units, and we may even need to have pulled back in some places. The Axis places all units on the map on the Axis side of the start line. Every frontline hex must have an Axis unit or ZOC, but the restriction's not quite the same as the Soviets. We don't need, we can actually have a frontline hex be a ZOC and not have a unit that's in the front line projecting that ZOC, which means if we wanted to, we can actually set back a bit, a hex back from the starting line, and that way we can actually shorten our line a little bit if we wanted to. which would allow us to concentrate combat factors more efficiently wherever we decide we want to attack. So I'm going to have to think very, very carefully about where we set up, especially because Romanian units, Hungarian units, and Italian units are probably best going to be set up in the south like they were historically. But I will have to do that another day because I've just about run out of time to be playing around here in the game room. So when I come back, I will have set up the Axis units for you. It will be just a second. For me, it could be a week. So we'll see you in the next cut. Okay, well, I decided to go ahead and set up the Axis, though before I play the next turn, I may have to reevaluate just how I did my setup. I tried to figure out as best that I could the right setup to go with, but, you know, this is all nebulous stuff here. So what I've done is I've set up, I evenly distributed the supply markers, and I'm going to adjust their position, because I just put them where they're at to kind of gauge where I think they ought to be. I'm going to move them up further along the rail track so that they have the most benefit of their movement per turn. But basically going along the lines of my previous strategy video. I've put a number of infantry in the north, mostly infantry. I put a reduced tank unit up there just to kind of help maintain the line. I've also pulled back a little bit from the front line in certain areas, so I might have to make an adjustment. I see. Yeah, I'm going to have to move a unit up. Gosh darn it. Well, okay. So I'll do that off camera before we start next time. But basically, I pulled back a little bit from the front line to shorten it, just so I have a little bit better coverage. But I've got to get another unit up just a little bit. I couldn't quite shorten it the way I wanted it to. You see the gap there. Similarly, did something like that in the center a little bit. I tried to pull back a little bit just so we don't have as much ground to cover. The center area is a tough one because I want to get a tighter defensive line for the Axis, and in fact, you know what I want to do, I guess, is the Axis is take Leningrad, which is why I put the German artillery unit up, which can bombard sort of like air units. I want to take Leningrad, and then from here, I might even want to just hold the line if I can. Maybe encircle these units if it's possible, but I'm not sure it will be. But just sort of hold here because I've put the vast majority of my armor in the south. All the full strength ones and numerous hexes to try to make encirclements along the line starting around here, all in this nice wide open spaces. I've tried to keep the majority of the air coverage along this bend from like here down to here. I've also put the HQs. I'm going to adjust where the HQs are at the moment, but basically we have one here, and one here that are going to be driving the action through this zone. And then down in Crimea, I have one unit garrisoning Odessa. I'm not sure if I need to do that, but I'm going to do that. Oh, I still have 2 motorized units. Okay, I know what I'm going to do with those guys. I'm just going to stick them right here. There we go. Solves my problem for the most part. Okay. You can see what I did there. I just placed them like so. And I guess that means I can actually move this guy up just a little tiny bit. That'll help. There we go. That's better. Okay. So then, yeah, most of my forces are set up to push east from here, looking to capture some victory cities here, and really, ideally, if we can, swing down for an oil auto victory. At least that's the idea. I have the supply marker down here all the way up because I think I'm going to have to double check. Here's what I'd like to do. Collapse Sevastopol, right? I think I can do that with the units here. We're going to have to wait and see. Could be this drags for a while. But if I can get across the strait, I think I can count a line of supply across the straits to the supply marker. I'm going to have to look at that. If I'm wrong, then I'm going to adjust where the supply marker is, because I could get axis units all the way over to here and still be in supply if I count that many hexes back to the supply marker, and I can count across a straight. The rail line ends here, so I can't go any further, but if I can project supply at least over here, then eventually it'll link up with the supply that's over here. The supply marker is currently buried, but it's like right here, I think. So, you know, if we push through here, there'll be supply down in here, and then we'll push for the bottom right of the map and try to capture the oil fields. We will have to deal with Stalingrad, but, you know, it's a thing we'll have to deal with. So, there we go. I think we're all set up. We're ready to rock and roll for Case Blue, after I do probably a little bit of double checking between now and the next video. So I know it took some time to get to this point. Now that the game is actually set up, we can actually have some fun. So we'll look to do that. Hope you enjoyed watching. Again, it's kind of interesting to see, you know, when we go to do these later war scenario setups, you know, what are we able to do? what is the player agency? What is the order of battle that we have to work with? But it wasn't too bad to set up, really. I think we'll do okay. As my voice is giving out, I will call it a video. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys later in the next one. Take care. Keep on gaming.